warriors, it's Hannah here and welcome from my humble abode. I'm sat here on the floor of my bedroom because we don't have a desk yet. I don't have all of my setup yet, but that's it. We've moved into our very first house, which is super excited, and if you want to know more about that, happy to talk about it or give you a little tour at some point. But today I just wanted to have a little sit down video with you all and talk about some of the habits, some of the behaviors that kept me stuck in my eating disorder. I am working with a lot, and I'm not exaggerating, a lot of clients right now, and some of these habits I see come back over and over and over. So I thought it was an important one to draw a little bit of attention to. These were quote unquote innocent little behaviors that didn't seem to be a very big deal. They slipped between the cracks. People sort of stopped commenting on them or weren't really aware of them, but they were nevertheless things that I did to appease the eating disorder to some extent. So yes, I was eating regular meals, I was eating more, I was exercising less, I was doing all the things that seemed to be recovery aligned. I was on the right track, I was gaining weight. But these habits nevertheless kept me coming back to the eating disorder to some extent. They kept me from fully 100% rewiring. And no, it wasn't as obvious as eating my meals and then compensating through exercise, but it was more of a matter of eating my meals, but doing it in a certain specific way or following a certain specific routine. And as I said, while that may sound innocent enough, it wasn't. It kept me from going those last few miles towards my full 100% recovery. And it's only once I got honest with myself about these things that I was able to make a change and embrace recovery. And that's why I'm here today and what I want you to start on today. Gaining that greater awareness so that you too can make those changes. So what concretely for me were those habits that maintain my eating disorder? If you like this video, if you want more of these videos, let me know below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get to some of those habits. Number 1, eating with small utensils or with the same utensils. The reasoning there, I think, was that my meals would last longer. I think that honestly came from that whole scarcity mindset, wanting to make my meals last longer, make the most of it, make it quote unquote perfect. But let's be honest, eating a bowl of soup with a little dessert spoon, that's nowhere near perfect. That is not enjoyable. If it wasn't small utensils, it would still be the same utensils. If it wasn't my little baby spoon, it would still be that one specific spoon with the specific pattern on it. Because for some reason, eating with that utensil in that way had started to feel safe. Had I had any different bowls or plates or cutlery, that sort of freaked me out. So before each meal, when my mum had set the table, I would go around and make sure that my specific cutlery and my specific plate was in my specific spot. If it wasn't, I'd move some things around. And most of the time, no one even noticed this, and if they did, well, they didn't care that much. I was just moving things around, but I was still having the meal, so what was the problem? Well, the problem was that I remained stuck in my own head, stuck in my own ways, and any small changes or eating out would freak me out. So the solution to this was, in my safe home environment, to challenge this. I started eating out of different bowls, different plates, purposely choosing the different cutlery, and over time, as with fear-free challenges, the fear, the anxiety response, it reduced. It got easier, and now I can eat out of any bowl that life throws my way. And yes, I still like my little spoons, but for dessert and for breakfast, but not to eat soup or whatever else I used it for back then. There's no way. Habit number 2 was eating at and within certain time frames. So I always told myself I couldn't have lunch, for example, before 12 o'clock, or I couldn't have dinner before 6 o'clock, or whatever times they were, I don't quite remember. In addition, I tried to drag out those meals for as long as possible. Again, that scarcity mindset, feeling like I needed to make it last. I needed to make the most out of it because this was my one opportunity. And for the longest time it had been, because I had been restricting. But by keeping this going, I kept my body, I kept my mind in that scarcity mindset, in that eating disorder mindset. I wasn't allowing my brain to fully register that food was now abundant. The rules were out the window. Because in fact, that wasn't really the case. I think especially in hospital, and this is probably where that habit started, it was just me and the four walls surrounding me, and dragging out my meals was one way to fill my day, no matter how sort of pathetic that may sound. I got myself a watch for the first time, really hyper focused on that. But that does mean there was an easy-ish fix as well. Step 1, I got rid of that watch. Step 2, I actually covered up some clocks for the time being, left my phone, all of that jazz, so I wouldn't be tempted to look at the clock as much. And I think over time, as I just started eating with people again, people who were quote unquote normal around food, this habit for me just sort of slipped away. You can also challenge yourself to eat faster, finish meals within a certain time frame, or put yourself other challenges like that if you have a behavior like that you are trying to break. Also, if you are hungry before a mealtime, eat. By doing that, you're telling your body that you listen to its cues, that you appreciate its cues, and that it's safe to send out these cues. By telling yourself, oh, it's not, a mealtime yet, it's still another hour or 2 hours before lunch or dinner or snack. You're just telling your body that its hunger cues are irrelevant, I suppose, that its hunger cues are worthless and shouldn't even be sending them out. You're not going to listen anyway, and that doesn't really harbor much trust with your body. For me personally, when I was in that mindset, I also kept shifting all my meals back to really late in the evening, and it just wasn't comfortable right before bed. So reminding myself of all of the improvements I would likely experience if I made some change there was also really, really helpful. Habit number 3, needing to know and influence what everyone else was eating. And honestly, I've always been a very caring person. I never wanted my sister or my mum or my dad to have an eating disorder or to be tempted by the same eating disorder habits that I was struggling with. But that probably wasn't really, not fully, my reasoning for being so controlling. I think wanting them to eat more than me was one way I justified eating myself. And it's only by stopping commenting on these things that gradually my focus shifted and I was able to focus on my own journey. Why did I have to eat these portions? What would this allow me to do? Why did it not matter what anyone else was eating? Those were important questions for me. What really helped me as well in this regard was eating meals on my own, and especially when I went on holidays on my own or left to go to university, it was just me and I was responsible for myself. So if I decided to start eating like my flatmates or my sister or whoever else and lost weight, well, there was no one else to blame at me, and it wasn't going to get me to my goals. So to me, that was a big wake-up call, and that helped me loads. Obviously, you need to be in a place where you're able to do that on your own if that's the approach you're going to take, but you can apply it and you can start practicing it in a safe and supported environment as well. The next habit I want to talk about is pretty related to the previous one, and that's talking about food all the time. In terms of, comparing kind of comments, but also just talking about my favourite foods, talking about what we're going to have for dinner, talking about X, Y, and Z food related, because my mind, I was thinking about food 24/7, which is not abnormal. If you are starved and your body is sending you cues that you need food. I think also in my recovery, I talked about food more because I wanted to show people that I was normal, that food was a fun thing, that I was pushing myself, that I was eating enough, and I think I was seeking a lot of reassurance at that time. And the reassurance in and of itself kept that motivation extrinsic to myself. So cutting out those comments, stopping all the food talk, those things were actually more important in my journey than I realized at the time. So even when the thought came up that I wanted to talk about what I had for lunch or whatever else it was, I was aware that I wanted to do that, but I stopped the behavior in its tracks. I didn't give in to it, and I tried to move on. And over time, I suppose stopping that behavior in its tracks became more natural, and that was really helpful for me. Over time, I learned to fill any silences with different topics. I found different things that I was more passionate about. And so food, over time, became less and less important. Habit number whatever we're on was eating a fruit-flavored yogurt every single morning. And this sounds like a bit of a weird one, but for me, that fruit-flavored yogurt, one of those little pots, yeah, that was a safe food. And I had, quite a few other safe foods as well that I would turn to day in, day out. And it kept me from branching out, especially at breakfast, which was my most difficult meal of the day. And initially, just having something for breakfast and challenging myself at other meals where maybe it felt a little bit easier to do so, that was good. That was progress. But there comes a place and time where you have to step up that fear food hierarchy and challenge yourself more and more until all of the fears are gone. I didn't want to live a life where I had a single fear food or food rule left. I wanted full food freedom, and that fruit-flavoured yogurt had to go. So there came a point where I realised I actually hated fruit-flavoured yogurts. I don't think I've had any since. And that I wanted to reach out and reach full recovery. So from that point onward, I started having croissants, lots of them. I started having regular yogurt with fruit. I started having oatmeal. I started having sandwiches, etc. I purposely varied up my diet. And nowadays, that means that I can have a fruit-flavoured yogurt if I want to, but I can have any of 1,000 other breakfast foods as well, and not freak out, and enjoy it. Another habit I had, whether I allow myself to eat these foods or not, was to label all of the foods that I did eat. So for example, chocolate and ice cream were bad, liquid calories were sort of wasted, fruit and vegetables were good, and I think this black and white thinking was a thinking style. My camera battery died, but we are back. What I think I was saying was that I used to, at this point in my recovery anyway, eat pretty much any food, but for some foods I ate, I still considered them sort of naughty, not as good. I felt a little bit guilty for them. I ate them, but I still also labeled them. I was still using the terminology of the eating disorder. I was still holding on to, in that way, the eating disorder. And if there was a day where I didn't see many vegetables or any fruit, well, that was a reason to definitely have some fruit or some vegetables the next day. So that was still that, if you do this, then you also have to do X, Y, or Z, or you need to make up for that with this or that. And I don't know, during the time of my eating disorder, there was just... Oh, great. I didn't turn my microphone on. There we go. At the time of my eating disorder, there was just a lot of negotiations with the eating disorder. And if you want to completely get rid of the eating disorder, there is no space for negotiations with the eating disorder. As long as you keep negotiating with it, it means it's still there. Once you stop listening to it, negotiating with it, even acknowledging it, that's when you allow the eating disorder to completely disappear out of your life. And that's an important final step. So yeah, while I was busy deciding what would be the best way to spend my calories, I realized that this mindset necessarily sort of required that calories were finite. So I told myself, actually, no, you've got limitless. Actually, you know what? You've got limitless numbers of calories to play with. You can have as much as you want. So if you want to have the smoothie and the meal, having the smoothie is not a waste of calories. You can do both. You can then have dessert. You can have a starter with that meal. It's all fine because food is not scarce. There's no calorie limits on what your body wants and deserves. At the time of my eating disorder, I had this idea that, and it wasn't even a conscious idea, I suppose my subconscious had the idea that my day, my intake, my food choices were to be determined by how I felt that day. If I was having a shitty day, you bet that would be reflected in my behaviors and in my food choices. Because food was one way I had always used to cope and to make myself feel, if not better, at least safe, comforted in some way. But guess what? Food and body image and how you're feeling on one particular day, they should not be related, because your body needs nourishment. Your body needs love and care, regardless of how you're feeling that day. And in fact, if you are having a bad day, being hungry is not going to help in the least. While it may provide you with some initial relief or, that little feel-good moment of restriction, that just keeps the behavior ingrained. It keeps the cycle going, because that belief, that experience is short-lived, and then you'll be seeking it out again and again and again. So stop the cycle now. I also went through a period of time where I was just, once I went to bed, I was planning my meals for the next day, for the next week. I was very rigid with my food choices and with the spontaneity that I allowed myself. And what helped me there was not just untangling those beliefs, but also just giving up control of my food so that I could start focusing on what's actually important and stop freaking obsessing over the silly things I put into my mouth. If you have a way to give up control, either by having people cook for you once in a while or all the time, by opting for more intensive treatment if need be, or whatever else is available to you, I strongly encourage it. For me, that was, absolutely mind shift blowing. Other things that really were mind shift blowing were completely cutting out exercise for a bit of time. Not necessarily for the effect it had on my body, but just having that break, that full break, even if it's just a few weeks. It just challenged the eating disorder and it got me out of my head. And getting rid of the scales. So giving up control, giving up exercise, and giving up the scales. Let me repeat that one last time. Giving up control, giving up exercise, giving up the scales. Whatever the eating disorder was focused on, whatever the eating disorder was trying to give me a sense of control around, those are precisely the things I gave up. And it honestly took a massive weight off of my shoulders. The last habit that I want to discuss that is really not discussed often enough is body checking. During my eating disorder and during my recovery especially, actually, I would weigh myself, which, as I said, I stopped. But I would also quite excessively check myself out in the mirror. I actually went through phases where I completely avoided the mirrors, or where I, let's just say, took a certain pose, looked at the areas that I was most insecure about to judge whether everything was still okay. So not only was that again a reassurance seeking cycle with some initial relief or not, and then longer term anxiety that perpetuated the cycle, it was also quite an embarrassing behavior because I was so reliant on it that I felt the need to do it even when I was out in public places, at school, etc. And there was one time when someone walked into the bathroom. I think I got away with it, but that was the moment that I realized that this is not okay. This is not normal, and I don't want to keep on doing this now and for the rest of my life, because if I'd kept up with that, I could easily kept up with that for the rest of my life. I realized in that moment that that was ridiculous and I didn't want to do that. So yeah, if you have any behaviors, whether it be weighing yourself, checking yourself out, I'm not going to list them here. I don't want this to be a triggering video, but if you have any body checking behaviors, be honest with yourself about them. Tell your support network about them if that is an option to you. And honestly, cut it out. Gain that awareness of the behavior and find ways to stop yourself at times when you know you're more likely to be triggered or you're more likely to engage. And keep that up. Over time, those habits can be broken. And that is a really big step in recovery. So yeah, I think for me, those are just a few of the habits that were really keeping me stuck in the eating disorder at a time where I'd already taken lots of steps, where I already felt like I was a really far way into my recovery, and where, you know, going that final mile really required myself to step up my game, be honest with myself and with others, take those final steps, go for it. I think that's my list, more or less. There's probably other behaviors, but I'd love for you to share, is there anything that I missed out on? Anything that is keeping you stuck? Any tips that you have of your own? Because I'd love for this to be a bit more interactive. Let me know in the comments. And also, just this is what I want to leave you on for this week. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with others, but especially with yourself. And become aware of some of these behaviors and some of these thought patterns. That is the first step in making any kind of change. And that is the first step in making recovery possible for you. Full recovery. You need to fully let go of the eating disorder on all of these different levels to fully break those associations that may be in place now, to fully rewire. So whatever the eating disorder tells you, do the opposite. And then repeat that again and again until you find that the eating disorder has... I was going to say something rude there. Until you find that the eating disorder has walked off and isn't coming back. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you. If there's any other specific requests you've got for me, definitely let me know. Share any questions, any of your own insights below. Love you all lots. Take really good care this week and see you soon for another video.